Heads up, it's still shifting up there.
Roller! All right, man, move quickly, but stay alert.
I kept warning the HOA about the slide, kept sending the data, the angles, the rain charts. But to them, I was just Frank Ward, the retired old man with a laser pointer and way too much free time. They called me paranoid, dramatic, said I was confusing physics with too much imagination. But I've spent 40 years of my life in terrain logistics, from Afghanistan to the Pacific Northwest, reading the language of the earth. And when the ground starts whispering, you don't argue with it, you just listen. The first sign was a thin, hairline crack behind my backyard fence, no wider than a nickel, but deep enough that my big shepherd mix, Trooper, stopped mid-step and refused to cross it. That's when I knew the whole hill was shifting, deep down. I reported it immediately. I sent photos, maps, detailed measurements. The HOA president, a guy named Victor Crowley, thanked me for my community spirit, and then he fined me $50 for spreading panic. 2 days later, Victor was up to his knees in mud, screaming for help while his shiny new community plaza slid downhill like a slice of melting butter. They laughed at my warnings, you see. They called me foolish. But the hill? The hill didn't find it funny at all. Juniper Ridge looks like $1 million, the kind of place where real estate flyers use the word nestled like it's a brand. 2 forested hills cradle our cul-de-sacs, lawns clipped to regulation height, mailboxes all matching in tasteful slate grey. Buyers see mountain charm and quiet luxury. What I see is a basin cut by ancient runoff, clay riding shotgun with decomposed granite, and a slope angle that smiles politely at gravity but never, ever says no. I moved here at 65 for quiet mornings. Coffee on the porch. Trooper snuffling at the ferns. The simple pleasure of watching the fog lift off the pines like a curtain. But old habits, they don't retire. They just take a nap with one eye open. Decades in my line of work means my mind still measures things in gradients and loads. It remembers the feel of saturated soil under a boot, how the earth gives back a little too willingly, like a handshake with bad intentions. The week the non-stop rain started, I pulled out my old logbook. Nothing fancy. Date, temperature, rainfall from my backyard gauge, and a column labeled indicators. Day 1, pooling behind the fence after just 10 minutes of rain. Day 2, a fence post near the old maple tree had shifted half a bubble on my level. Day 3, a shallow swale near the trail, which always drained by noon, held water all day. None of it screamed disaster. All of it whispered trend. Trooper knew before I did. He's got a nose like a barometer and the patience of a saint. 4 years, he'd trotted the same path with me, paws soft on the duff. Now, he'd plan himself at the top of the slope, stance stiff, testing the air like a statue deciding whether to come to life. The morning he refused the lower path entirely, I knew it was time to grab the laser rangefinder and the inclinometer instead of the coffee mug. The grade had steepened a fraction, nothing your knees would notice. But water channels had annealed into hairline streams, braiding clean down the face, shiny threads where there hadn't been any 2 weeks ago. I mapped them. It felt absurd, sketching contour lines while the neighborhood Facebook group debated the correct color for porch string lights. But absurd is just another word for being early. I dropped the path into a simple elevation model, layered the current rainfall against the 5-year mean, and marked a handful of spots with a red dot and a note, monitor. In my line of work, you don't get points for being dramatic. You get points for being precise. The HOA, meanwhile, announced a community enrichment initiative. The email arrived with confetti graphics and a banner that read, "Welcome to Juniper Commons." It read like someone was auditioning for a cruise brochure. Concrete event pad, decorative benches, extra parking, solar string lighting, family movie nights, and at the bottom, a map that made my stomach drop like an elevator cable snapped. The project said exactly where my runoff tracings converged, like rivers finding an ocean. I walked down to the flag site. Orange stakes marked an oblong rectangle. A crew from a local landscaping company, Crownstone Landscaping, their logo said, was unloading compactors like they were setting up for a picnic. No geotechnical drill. No bore logs. No sign of a soils engineer. Just 2 guys in hoodies arguing about lunch and a third dragging a vibrating plate compactor toward ground that squelched under his boots. "Morning," I said, calm as you please. "You folks have soil reports." A young kid with a baby beard and an affable shrug nodded toward the stakes. "We got plans, sure." "Plans aren't reports," I corrected. "Any test pits?" percolation data, moisture content checks, compaction protocol for high plasticity clay. He blinked like I'd switched languages. We are just here to prep. The HOA's got consultants. I looked at the Crownstone logo again and had to smile dryly. Consultants. I went home and wrote my first email. It was polite, the way a warning label on a chainsaw is polite. To Board at Juniper Ridge HOA. Subject: slope instability. Request for geotech review prior to construction. I summarized my credentials, the years, the certifications, and detailed the site's geomorphology, the observed indicators of subsidence, photos, coordinates, and a proposed halt-pending licensed geotechnical assessment. I attached a 2-page brief with recommended mitigations: drainage channels cut on contour, silt fencing, stage loading. No slab pour until a minimum 14-day dry window. I signed it and hit send. The auto-reply arrived before Trooper finished his water bowl. Thank you for your community spirit. Your message has been received. 2 hours later, a second email arrived, this time from Victor Crowley himself. Victor likes bold text and bullet points. He wears that permanent realtor smile, the one that says, "I'm listening while my eyes are doing math." Thank you, Mr. Ward, for your concerns. The email read, "Our consultants have confirmed the site is appropriate for development. We appreciate resident engagement and ask that you trust the process. We're excited to deliver a space that brings us together." Nothing in there about hydrology. Everything in there said photo op. I printed a copy of my brief and walked to the HOA office, an old model home reeking of perpetual air freshener and toner. Dana Crowley, Victor's wife, and the board's unofficial image manager, sat behind the desk in a blazer that made the word community feel like a trademark. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Ward?" "Just dropping off data," I said, setting the folder down. "A licensed soils engineer should review this before you mobilize equipment. The ground is close to critical." She smiled warmly, the way people smile right before they tell you no. "We are moving quickly to serve the neighborhood, Frank." "That's exactly what worries me," I said. Back home, the rain deepened. The maple tree I'd been watching leaned another sliver of a degree. I took a photo and overlaid it with the one from last week. The trunk jumped. That was math enough to kill any denial. On day 5 of the storm, I met Sarah Jenkins at the mailbox bank. Sarah is the kind of neighbor every street deserves: quiet competence in a sun hat, the practical kindness of a retired nurse who still counts pills in her head. "Frank," she said, voice low, "I've got hairline cracks in my basement I've never seen before. North wall by the sump pump, and the back patio has dropped a 1/4 inch. I measured twice." I liked her more for that. She was watching the hill when she said it, not me. I told her what I'd been tracking: the water channels, the grade, the maple, the compaction issues, the slab plan. I didn't dramatize a thing. I just laid the pieces on the table and let the picture draw itself. "My nephew runs a local news blog," she said finally. Quiet, but read by all the local contractors. He could shine a little light. Light helps, I agreed. But the ground is going to do the talking. That night, an article went up. Juniper Ridge HOA ignores landslide warnings, pushes ahead with plaza. It just quoted my email and showed a photo of the flag pad sitting in a puddle. The comments were a split screen, half the neighbors worried, the other half moaning about people who hate change. The board responded the next morning with an email titled Clarity and Unity. It thanked residents for their passion, lamented unverified alarmism, and reminded everyone that our community thrives on trust. Translation: stop talking to the guys with the compactors. I sent a second email, sharper, attaching new photos and a rainfall chart, adding a line in bold: recommend immediate halt pending third-party geotechnical review. Then I called an old colleague. Dr. Helen Chavez runs planning for the county's emergency office now. The kind of person who can look at a map and see tomorrow's problem waving. "Ward," she said when she picked up, voice equal parts tired and amused. "Tell me you're finally taking up fishing." "Wish I were," I said. "Send me a licensed geotech if you've got one not already underwater." I sent her the package. She texted back 2 hours later. Got movement indicators. Pushing for eyes on. No promises. Red tape and rain everywhere. Bureaucracy is a tide you learn to read. You don't fight it. You time your breath. By late afternoon, The site sprouted a fresh set of stakes and a glossy sign, Juniper Commons, coming soon. Underneath was a rendering so sentimental it could have been a greeting card. Families on benches, string lights, a movie screen under a starry sky. There was no mud in the picture. Trooper and I stood at the edge of the tape and listened to the ground. You can't hear a hillside move unless you learn what silence sounds like just before it stops being silence. I sent one more note to the board, flagged urgent, and copied the city engineering inbox. For the first time, I added a sentence I don't use lightly. Lives could be at risk if loading continues under current saturation. Then I closed the laptop, set the kettle, and leaned at the window. The rain drummed, the maple leaned. Somewhere in the distance, a compactor hummed like a stubborn, stupid idea. At dawn the next day, flatbeds rolled in, punctual as guilt. A man with a clipboard and an HOA windbreaker, Marcus Cole, the vice president and owner of Crown Stone, paced the perimeter while the crew unrolled vapor barrier on ground that would have slurped up a man if he stood still long enough. He saw me over the fence and gave me the kind of tight smile you save for speed bumps. I took a final set of measurements and printed hard copies of everything. Paper still has a weight that email doesn't. I slipped the folder into a plastic sleeve, put on my old field shirt, not a costume, just a tool, and walked back to the office. "Mr. Ward," Dana said, smile already deployed. "Back again." "Same reason," I said, setting the folder down. "This is the third time I've submitted. The site needs a licensed assessment. Pause, test, then pour." She held the plank smile. "We are committed to progress." "So is gravity," I said. The ground was keeping receipts, and I planned to keep mine, too. The only difference was mine had dates and coordinates. The hills had consequences. I showed up at the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse was packed. I sat in the back, muddy boots, rain jacket, clipboard under one arm. Trooper waited outside, watching through the glass door like my furry security detail. Victor started the meeting with that realtor grin, all white teeth and zero listening capacity. "Before we get to the budget," Victor said, "we'd like to open the floor to community feedback. We'll keep comments to 2 minutes per person." 2 minutes. That's what a lifetime of experience was worth. I stood up, slow but steady, and walked to the front. I placed my notes on the podium and spoke in the calm, clipped tone that 2 decades of military briefings had burned into me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began. "I've been monitoring the slope. The rainfall saturation has pushed us past the critical threshold for shear failure. I've measured surface movement of nearly 2 inches in the last 10 days. That hill is active. If you continue loading it, it will collapse." The room went dead silent. Victor forced a slow, patient smile, the kind reserved for children and fools. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Ward. Our consultants have reviewed the area and found no imminent danger." I looked directly at him. "What consultants?" "A landscaping and grading firm out of Tacoma. Experienced folks." I let out a dry, short laugh. "Landscaping isn't geology, Mr. Crowley. That's like hiring a florist to run a pharmacy." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Ward, this meeting is for community updates, not fear-mongering." "Fear-mongering?" I said. "You're building a concrete plaza on liquefying clay. That's not progress. That's hubris with a brochure." Dana whispered something to him, and he forced another smile. "Thank you, Mr. Ward. Your time is up." I sat back down. They moved on to patio paint color guidelines, because the shade of beige obviously mattered more than the integrity of the ground we all lived on. 2 days later, a letter appeared in my mailbox with the HOA logo, violation notice, misinformation and interference. They fined me for caring. That evening, I walked Trooper down the trail. The rain had softened the air. The maple was now leaning a full 3 degrees. Ranger sniffed the ground, whined, and backed away. "Yeah," I muttered. "I feel it, too." I set up a makeshift monitoring line with stakes and fluorescent cord, measuring every quarter meter of movement. Then I mounted a GoPro on the railing, angled it toward the hill, and programmed it to take time-lapse photos every 10 minutes. If the city ignored me too, I'd have footage that couldn't be dismissed. 3 nights later, Sarah Jenkins knocked on my door. "Frank, my basement's cracking. The north wall. I can fit a nickel in it." "Then it's already begun," I said. "Document everything. Take photos, measurements, and if you see water pooling behind your house, call me immediately." She nodded, brave but shaken. The following morning, the HOA sent another cheerful email blast. Community celebration this Saturday. Coffee and donuts on the new concrete pad. I almost laughed myself off the porch. That same day, Dr. Chavez called. "I pushed your data through unofficially," she said. One of our geotech guys looked at it. His words, not mine. Significant subsurface saturation. Slope nearing critical failure threshold. You were right. Can you issue a stop order? I'm trying. It'll take signatures. But Frank, you need to be careful. If that hill goes, it'll go fast. I thanked her and sent one last email to Victor, attaching Helen's message, underlining the key phrase, immediate halt of all site operations. No reply. Instead, the next morning, 3 flatbed trucks rolled in again. I watched as Marcus Cole directed the unloading. His hand grinned smug enough to shine through the drizzle. I wrote a final notice by hand, big letters, black ink, imminent risk. Halt all work. I walked down and taped it to the construction sign. The next morning, my notice was gone. In its place, the HOA had posted a laminated sign, authorized construction site. Trespassers will be reported. By sunset, the first major crack had appeared along the upper edge, just above the new concrete pad. It ran jagged like a lightning bolt across the wet clay. Trooper barked once. I compiled everything, photos, charts, timestamps, into a single PDF. Final warning, active landslide conditions. Recipients, HOA Board, City Engineering, County Emergency, Local News Desk. The message was short. This is not speculation. This is physics. You are endangering lives. I hit send. Then I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and sat on the porch. Somewhere out there, the ground was preparing its verdict. The rain didn't pound. It was a persistent, arguing mist. By the third straight day of saturation, I could feel the tension in the air. At 9 a.m., I set the time lapse. The fence lines were settling like a sigh. Eileen called. It's high by 3/16 along the north edge. The sump's running constantly. Log it, I told her. Move anything valuable off that wall. At 11:17 a.m., the HOA emailed a reply under the banner clarification and community pride. We will not be derailed by fear. They doubled down on Saturday's celebration. Donuts, I thought. The universal antidote to physics. Just after midnight, Dr. Chavez called. I got a partial. We can issue a soft advisory in the morning. Frank, if you can convince them to cancel the event, do it. I can't convince a mirror. It's a reflection, I said. I sent Victor a final note. Cancel the event. If people get hurt, you own it. His out-of-office response arrived in under a minute. See you Saturday at Juniper Commons, with a smiley face I will remember until my last day. I didn't sleep. At 3:41 a.m., the barometer dropped a notch. I stepped onto the porch. Somewhere on the slope, a root snapped, sharp, fast, unmistakable. At 4:09 a.m., headlights rolled into the cul-de-sac. I watched through binoculars. Victor Crowley stepped out into the rain. He crossed quickly to the utility box that feeds the plaza lights, popped it, and did something with his hands. The string lights blinked and died. He stood there for a long moment, then disappeared. I saved the time-lapse stills. Pre-event Victor. The truth doesn't need commentary. It just needs daylight. Saturday dawned grey. The kind of grey that doesn't promise, doesn't forgive. By 8:30 a.m., I went down anyway. Not for the coffee, but because I needed to witness the final act. I stood at the edge of the caution tape. Victor was there in his best navy jacket, shaking hands. The new concrete pad shone like a promise it couldn't keep. I scanned the site. The slab looked wrong, pale, with dark streaks where moisture seeped from underneath. Trooper tugged his leash. His paw sank half an inch into what should have been firm ground. I bent, pressed my fingers to the soil. It quivered. Victor tapped the empty good morning, neighbors. Thank you for coming out to celebrate the future of our community. Future, I thought. You're standing on its grave. When Victor raised the ceremonial scissors, the first tremor rolled through the crowd. Subtle enough that most thought it was a truck. Kennedy, I shouted. Shut it down. Now. He looked up, annoyed. Aaron, please. Let's not ruin the mood with more of Mr. Ward's doomsday scenarios. The next tremor cut him off. Louder. Longer. The coffee cups rattled. A crack, sharp and wet, snapped through the air. Then came the low, rolling grind, the ground itself shifting gears. Everybody off the pad. I yelled, "Get to high ground now." The smile died on Victor's face. He opened his mouth to argue, but the hill answered before he could. The slope above the plaza convulsed. The ground bulged, rose, and then collapsed like a lung deflating. Mud surged forward, thick and fast. Screams filled the air. Victor froze for half a second too long, then bolted. Dana stumbled behind him. Marcus Cole went down to one knee. I grabbed Eileen and pulled her back. I jumped the guardrail into the rising water. "Over here." I shouted. "Grab my hand." I hauled Victor forward, his perfect jacket soaked in filth. Tara followed, sobbing. I grabbed Marcus by the collar, pulled with everything I had. Together, we stumbled toward the slope's edge until we hit stable ground. The hill had spoken and then gone still. The plaza was gone, replaced by a mangled scar of mud, wood, and twisted steel. Victor collapsed beside me, gasping. He looked at me with eyes wide and unfocused. "You knew," he coughed. We could have died." "I warned you," I said simply. Some warnings are meant to save people who don't want to be saved. By the time emergency sirens cut through the rain, the worst was over. I gave my statement to a deputy. "Good thing you did, Mr. Ward," he said. "Without that footage, this could have buried half the lower street." Victor, limping toward me, looked hollow. "Aaron," he rasped, "we'll make it right." "No," I said. "You'll make it real." The county declared the site a hazard zone. The cost to stabilize the hill was estimated at nearly $500,000. The HOA's insurance didn't cover acts of negligence. Emails flooded the HOA's inbox. At the emergency board meeting, I watched Victor try to defend himself. "Mistakes were made," he whispered. "Mistakes?" I cut in. "You call that a mistake? A mistake is forgetting to mow your lawn. You gambled with people's homes." Eileen rose beside me. "My basement's ruined because of your pride. If that slide had gone 30 feet further, we'd be digging bodies, not mud." Victor was done. "The board has decided to step down temporarily while the investigation concludes." The state subpoenaed my time-lapse footage. I handed over the drive, every time-stamped frame from the first crack to the final collapse. Dr. Chavez presented the county's findings: gross negligence, reckless oversight. Then the footage played. Victor, at 4:09 a.m., crouching beside the power box, tampering with public safety systems. The verdict was clear. The HOA board was referred to the state attorney's office for formal charges. Victor Morgan's plea deal was accepted for reckless endangerment and evidence tampering. He lost his license and his freedom. Eileen Parker led a new community committee. They didn't build a new plaza. Instead, they planted native wildflowers on the stabilized slope. No concrete, no benches. They called the project the Listening Field. I stood on the ridge, the sun setting, casting light on the raw soil. Eileen had staked a new wooden sign there, the Listening Field, dedicated to those who heard too late. Below that, because the earth always speaks, and wisdom begins when we listen. I chuckled quietly, then wrote the final entry in my logbook. Date, April 3rd. Observation, ground stable. Hill breathing easy. Note, they finally listened. The ground is quiet again. But I know better than to think silence means safety. Sometimes silence is just the earth taking its next deep breath, and I'll be there to listen when it exhales again. The truth, the earth never shouts first. It starts with a whisper. So maybe the lesson isn't about mud or HOA politics. Maybe it's about listening. Really listening before the warning becomes a disaster. If you made it this far, tell me where you're watching from, and let me know. Have you ever ignored a small warning that turned into something big? Or, what is the most ridiculous thing your HOA has ever tried to fine you for? Let's hear your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you believe in stories that remind us that arrogance might build walls, but wisdom plants roots.